Jim Carrey had a very sketchy relationship with Cathriona White. She was a former makeup artist who took her life after dating Jim. They had a toxic relationship, and it seems like Jim Carrey was playing with her emotions. He illegally obtained the drugs that killed Cathriona and then lied to the public about it. Jim told us that he took care of her family and her funeral expenses, but that was all a lie. He also sent a suspicious text message to Cathriona after she had already died. And in my opinion, that was his way of trying to shift the blame off of his own actions. There is something sketchy here, and Cathriona White deserves justice. So let's get into it. So Cathriona White is a 30-year-old Irish makeup artist who dated Jim Carrey on and off for about 3 years. She was found dead and surrounded by prescription pill bottles in her LA home on September 28, 2015. She also left behind a suicide letter, which gave a lot of insight into what she was going through and her relationship with Jim Carrey. Law enforcement told TMZ that they responded to a call in the LA area Monday night. They went to the residence and they found her body. TMZ was also told that about 5 people showed up to the home when they found her deceased. Even though Catriona's body was found on September 28th, I personally believe that she passed away a few days before that, maybe as early as September 24th. Catriona left behind a note which was addressed to Jim Carrey, and it references their breakup on September 24th. She also tweeted out on her Twitter page, signing off Twitter, "I hope I have been a light to my nearest and dearest," which was her last and final tweet. So let's talk a little bit about their relationship and why I personally believe that Jim Carrey is at fault for her death. First off, the drugs that she used to overdose were pills that Jim Carrey was originally prescribed, but he was prescribed them under another name. It also turns out that Jim provided these drugs to Catriona on September 21st, 2015, just days before she overdosed on them. I'll break this down a little bit more later on in the video, but Jim Carrey was actually sued for her wrongful death because her family believes that he is at fault, and I actually went through the legal documents and they're pretty damning. And it turns out that Catriona did indeed overdose on the drugs that Jim Carrey provided her, which included some Ambien, which is like a sleep medicine, a ton of Percocet, prescription drugs that she should have never had access to. And I actually learned a lot about Jim Carrey's relationship with Catriona through these court documents, because a lot of the media articles are very biased towards Jim and make it seem like he's such a great guy. Catriona's family lawyer wrote that this case is about Jim Carrey using his immense wealth and celebrity status to illegally obtain and distribute highly addictive and, in this case, deadly controlled substances. After obtaining these drugs illegally under a bogus name, Arthur King, which I'm like, Arthur King, like what a random name. Mr. Carrey proceeded to provide the prescription drugs to his 30-year-old girlfriend, Catriona White. Jim did so despite the fact that he knew that she was ill-equipped to ingest and manage highly addictive prescription drugs outside the care of a licensed physician. So the lawyer is calling Jim out for obtaining these drugs illegally and then providing them to someone who did not need them and should have never had them in the first place. And it turns out that Jim did break the law by using this name Arthur King, which I'm confused, like how do you even get around that? That means you need to have a doctor who prescribes you this medicine in a false name so that you could then obtain it with this false name. It just seems like very illegal. And it seems like this is very common in Hollywood, which is like, oh my gosh, this place is so upside down, people. Like, if you have not been living here now, it is like the upside down world, like the Stranger Things situation. But law enforcement tells TMZ that they actually confirmed that the prescription was written for Jim Carrey using this alias, which is something a lot of celebrities do for privacy reason, which I understand. Like, you're a celebrity, you want to keep your health private, but at the same time, like, when do these people ever have to follow the law? Like, at this point, it's like they just don't ever have to follow the law because they constantly get excuses like this one, where he can get a bunch of prescription medication under a fake name. No one else could go and get away with that. But let's talk about what led Cathriona to taking her own life, because again, part of this is Jim's fault. Cathriona told her friend Denise Bradshaw that her relationship with Jim Carrey was a roller coaster. She was madly in love with him, but she grew depressed whenever she felt him slipping away. Jim broke up with her on September 24th, 2015, just days before she passed away, or at least when her body was found. And she was really going through it during this breakup. Like, she did not know how to handle. But as I was doing research on this story, I found an interesting pattern that Jim does everything in his power to make himself look good. At every corner, he just like switches the narrative to try to make it seem like he is not at fault here. Jim Carrey told TMZ on September 19th that they went to a birthday dinner at Nobu and Malibu and that she was super happy then. But then he ended up breaking up with her a few days later on September 24th. But he told TMZ, and again, this is like him trying to switch up the narrative, that he wasn't going to completely break up with her. He didn't want to sever the relationship completely. He just kind of needed a break. So he's trying to soften the blow and make it seem like he didn't just go and break up with her like a cold-hearted bastard. But I have a feeling that Jim knew exactly what he was doing and that she was capable of taking her own life over this breakup. It's like he almost set her up to do so. Catriona's family lawyer wrote that Jim had an obsession with controlling and manipulating Catriona. Jim had the ability to monitor surveillance cameras on the home that she stayed in, and by design, he was able to keep track of her every move. Without Catriona's knowledge, Jim Carrey's assistant remotely checked on the surveillance cameras and determined that Catriona had entered the residence at midday on September 24th, 2015, but hasn't left since then. After learning this fact, Jim Carrey nor his assistant alerted authorities. So Jim had his assistant go and check the cameras to check up on what Catriona's been up to. They see that she entered the home on September 24th, and then she never left. So that's a pretty telling sign that there's something wrong here if she's just like locked up in the home and hasn't left for food or ordered food or groceries or running errands or just been seen alive. This part is extremely sketchy. In a one-day earlier text message police uncovered on Catriona's phone, they found that Jim actually texted her and asked her, "Where are the painkillers that I left under the sink?" Those 3 pill bottles that he was referring to in that text message were the same pill bottles found at the scene that ultimately killed Catriona. When Jim sent that text message to Catriona, I believe at this point he knew that she took her own life and he was now trying to orchestrate some type of cover-up. Catriona's family lawyer wrote, "On information and belief, after Catriona took her life, and in an effort to cover up his conduct in her death, Jim Carrey sent a bogus text message on September 27th, 2015 to Catriona, who was already dead, pretending as though he had misplaced the drugs that she took that took her own life. When in reality, Jim Carrey fully knew that he had voluntarily and illegally provided these drugs to Catriona, which ultimately killed her. So he tried to play pretend on September 27th, like, hey, where are those drugs, by the way? The drugs that he initially gave to her, 6 days prior on September 21st. So he's really trying to erase himself from the situation. And that's a major theme here, which makes me think that he is guilty. If Jim Carrey really cared about this woman, then he would have put the pieces together. And he did put the pieces together. He just didn't act in a normal way like you and I would, where we try to like save someone or figure out what's going on here. It's like he knew what happened and then was like, oh shit, like I gotta like cover my ass now because I'm the one that gave her these drugs that she took that killed her. But after her passing went public, Jim Carrey started a media storm where he really tried to push a narrative that he's a good guy and that he's taking care of her family. So Jim Carrey and his team reached out to TMZ and informed them that Jim paid for Catriona's entire family to fly from Ireland to LA and that he's paying for their hotel, paying for the funeral arrangements. He's just paying all of the expenses. He's extremely devastated over her death and wanted to make sure that her family was taken care of. That sounds like a really good thing. I mean, what a good guy. He's going and taking care of her family and making sure that they're all okay. You would hope that he would do that. I mean, he's got millions of dollars. He can go and, help him out. But that's not what happened. The lawyer wrote that Jim Carrey went to the press and tried to tell everyone that he's offered to pay for funeral expenses and that he's taking care of the family and everything like that. But this was just to publicize his generosity and to make it seem like he's a grieving boyfriend who just wants to make everything better, even though in reality he's the man who illegally obtained these drugs and provided them to Cathriona, which ultimately killed her. I wonder what he could be in trouble for, because I think back to high school and times like that where there are drug dealers, and these drug dealers ultimately kill the people who use the drugs because people aren't supposed to use drugs anyway. So I wonder if he would be if he would get in trouble the same way that a drug dealer would if they were to sell someone drugs that ultimately killed them. But let's get back to the expenses, because Jim Carrey never paid a dime of funeral expenses. He never gave the family money, and he never provided any kind of support. It was just simply a TMZ article to shape public opinion. And what's really sick about this man is that he participated in her funeral that he claimed that he paid for, but he never actually did. It's giving very much snake energy to go to the media and tell them one thing, but in real life do a completely other. And after he was done propping himself up, he decided to go and destroy her reputation and make it seem like this was all going to happen anyway, because I guess at one point Cathriona did attempt to take her own life. This is very convenient for Jim Carrey, because we would have never known about this experience that Cathriona went through and how she almost took her life, because her father actually passed away and she had a really hard time with it. So she did attempt to take her life in 2012. I do think it's important to recognize a history of this behavior, because she did, I guess, attempt to take her life before, but at the same time, you can't take that situation and try to use the context of which that happened and apply it to this, which is a very different situation. They also call out the fact that her mother sent her a very nasty text message, called her a failure, and this happened days before she ended up taking her own life. So some people, I guess, are trying to push the narrative that her mother drove her to death, but her suicide note says something very different. We learn a lot about Cathriona and her relationship with Jim from her letter. She left this note on her iPad for the world to read, and it told a very different story than what Jim has been trying to tell, because she accuses Jim of flooding her world with drugs and disease. She wrote, "You have not thought about the stigma I have to live with for the rest of my life. You have not apologized or once asked if there's something you could do to make it better or even felt bad. This is what I want. You gave me HSV and HPV. I want you to apologize for it because you care enough too. I want you to understand that however little a thing seems to you, it ruins a girl's life. I want you to take care when you are with other girls and pay attention to your body. Your actions affect people. I don't want to be disrespected like you have been doing." This is actually a copy of her note, and as you guys just heard, she accused Jim Carrey of giving her an STD, which is something that has been a problem in their relationship in the past. They started dating in 2012, but in 2013, Cathriona actually tried to sue Jim Carrey for giving her an STD. Jim Carrey claims that she was actually trying to extort him in early 2013, and that he made a mistake by settling this STD claim. So pretty much she tried to take him to court to sue him over the HPV and the HSV, and he ultimately settled with her just because he didn't want to go to court and have to deal with it publicly. Cathriona did have a secret husband named Mark Burton. Throughout this entire story, he's not really a big character, but he really jumps in after she passes away to pretty much sue Jim Carrey. Actually, Mark, her secret husband, and her mother claimed that the STIs were way too much for Cathriona to handle, and it caused a lot of mental distress, which led to her overdosing. But when it comes to this STD, STI case in particular, Jim stands firm that he never gave her anything. Supposedly, she had these STIs before she ever met Jim, and she faked a clean STD test and to show him, I guess, to be like, hey, I'm clean. But ultimately, she wasn't clean, and she already had these diseases that she's claiming that Jim gave to her. And it actually turns out that they declared that she committed forgery by forging this clean STD test before she met Jim and then presenting it to him like she was clean herself. But it does sound like Catriona's lawyer isn't backing down and claims that her test wasn't false, that she was clean before she met him, and now she's got the herpes type 1, type 2. So there's a lot of back and forth when it comes down to that, and ultimately they settled it, but I mean, the matter itself is not settled. We don't really know the truth. And that's what's really weird about this story and why I wanted to talk about it, because there are a bunch of different people who were involved in Catriona's life, and they all want to shake off any responsibility or blame for her passing. For example, the Church of Scientology literally got involved and said that, oh, we have nothing to do with her death. The Church of Scientology is firing back at accusations that it had anything to do with Jim Carrey's girlfriend taking her life, saying no one blames the Bible when a Christian commits when they take their own life. Okay, Scientology is like full of crap. I cannot stand them. But Cathriona White was reportedly very active in the Church of Scientology, taking part in a program called Purification Rundown, a controversial drug and alcohol detox program combining exercise, medication, and sauna sessions. So she was very involved in Scientology, but they want to make sure that you guys know that they're not the ones to blame. Law enforcement sources did tell TMZ that they did go and question church officials about her involvement in the detox, but they believe that her death had nothing to do with Scientology, which I guess is a win for Scientology in this one. But ultimately, this was a tragic story, and if it triggered you in any kind of way, I will try to leave some resources below, but I think it's important that we talk about Catriona's death because I feel like it's kind of a mystery, like low key, because like there's just so much back and forth. The drugs were like bought under or were prescribed under another name. We've got like the funeral expenses that weren't paid for by Jim, but Jim claims that he paid for them. There's just so much back and forth here. And looking at the TMZ articles, it was clear to me that Jim had a connection at TMZ and was pushing a false narrative. It reminds me of the Free Britney movement and whenever her father and her team would go to TMZ and give them a story, and TMZ just posts everything and anything, which is good and bad at the same time because they just post whatever they're told, but at the same time, like it's not always factual, so TMZ needs to double check when it comes to those sources. But it seems like they were the perfect tool for Jim to use them to reshape how the public saw Catriona, because they have stories about her like taking her own life because of her dad, taking her own life because of her mom, that she had all these issues prior, and that Jim is a great guy who paid for everything and took care of the family. But obviously that's all really far from the truth. So comment below what you guys think, and I'll see you in a new video soon. Bye guys.